83.01. The pound buys $1.22 and €1.19. LBC weather mainly dry tonight with frost in places and a low of 1 degree. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. It's 8:02. Now, on the panel with me tonight, to my left, Polly Toynbee, columnist for The Guardian. To her left, Alex Burghart, Conservative Shadow Cabinet Office Minister and Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary and MP for Brentwood and Ongar. To my right, Anne McElvoy, broadcaster and executive editor of Politico Europe, who hosts the Power Play podcast. And next to her, Danny Beales, Labour MP for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, the constituency formerly represented by Boris Johnson. Is that how you like to be known, Danny?
Not particularly, no. Danny Beales is fine. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Okay, we're glad we got that out of the way. And, of course, let me remind you, as always, you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's start with the text question from Stephen in East Grinstead. He says, what happens next if this ceasefire agreement is just a false dawn? Polly Toynbee.
Well, in a sense, it's a false dawn, that I don't think anybody thinks that this is a lasting, permanent peace, but it is a ceasefire, which is the first step. And what a sigh of relief goes all around the world after the horror of what we've been observing night after night. And there's something rather awful, isn't there, about being told the ceasefire is going to happen on Sunday, and we know that between now and then a whole lot more people will be killed. But in the end, a two-state solution will be the only answer. We seem to be miles from that. We wait to see who feels ownership of this peace. And it seems that Trump wants to feel that he owns it, so perhaps he can make it happen. Perhaps he can keep a grip on the Israelis and make sure that at least on that side, there is a will towards peace.
On the two-state solution front, I mean, this has been something that's been going around for, 3 or 4 decades now. But you've got to have at least one of the sides that wants a two-state solution. At the moment, you've got both sides. Well, I say both sides. In this particular war, you've certainly got the Israeli Prime Minister, who's made clear he does not approve of a two-state solution. And you've got Hamas, who certainly don't. But then you've got the Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, who seem to be completely invisible at the moment. So, I mean, it's very difficult to be optimistic about anything.
I don't think you can be optimistic, but I mean, just every day that there isn't a war, that's that many more people, children, not being killed. So you've got to be pleased about that, even if it's, not lasting, even if it bursts out now and then. I think there's been so long of such horror. And for the Israelis, Israeli soldiers and the people who suffered and the families of hostages, that there will be a wish for it not to start again, I think. I hope. One always has to assume the best of people.
It's difficult, though, in this situation, isn't it?
It is.
Alex Burghart.
I think Polly's right in what she says. This is a ceasefire. I don't think it's a peace. And however, sort of gladly we must embrace that. I just always feel very sad and depressed thinking about the future of the region. I visited Israel and Palestine about 20 years ago, and I'd been to, just beforehand, I'd been around former Yugoslavia, and I came back home from that trip thinking, there's a future here. I can see that these people want to live alongside each other in peace, and that there's a way forward. And I came back with exactly the opposite feeling, having been to the Middle East. And 20 years on, one sees the same thing. And if you look back in history, there are sometimes very problematic relationships between neighbours that last huge periods of time. And I'm afraid I see nothing that suggests that this is anything other than that.
Anne?
I think it's very interesting that this has happened, Ian, on the timing that it has, right on the eve or before the inauguration by a day, but it has still been, if you like, chalked up to the Biden administration, which desperately wanted to get this done or get any form of ceasefire across the line before it left office. And I think in some ways that shows a certain flexibility which is not a word one associates a lot with Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, because he's, that is not really what everyone thinks of the way he's conducted this war after October the 7th, and his arguments for it. Flexibility is not really something he presents very often, but I think it's quite interesting that in a sense he's got that done or signed up to that, negotiated by Qatar, which played a considerable role here. I have to say, a rather cynical one, as it was a major supporter of Hamas for many, probably still is, actually, financially. But the fact is that these things only happen when a picture comes together, when there's a sort of tessellation, like a jigsaw that somehow comes together, even to get the ceasefire over the line. And my fellow guests are absolutely right. A ceasefire is not a peace, as Alex put it, and Polly had something similar
particularly since Israel actually hasn't announced that it's signed up to it yet.
I think they don't. They're like Qatar do it. I mean, there's a certain thing called political communication in the Middle East, which is quite complex and quite nuanced. And I think that idea of having someone else do it sort of blunts that. I was just going to say that the point being really was, how does it change then? How does this argument about what happens next change? Because Donald Trump is in the White House. We know where his sympathies lie. He's more wholeheartedly
just before you go
Israel.
down that road, we've actually got a question on that, so hold your horses on that for a moment.
My horses are held.
Danny Beales.
Yeah, I think similarly to Polly, it's hard to feel joyous after the terrible events in Israel in October and subsequently in Gaza, since the immense suffering and unfortunately suffering that at least in the short term will continue, particularly humanitarian suffering, which the need for medical supplies and humanitarian aid does not go away with a ceasefire. But having felt a sense of quite hopelessness really over the last 12 months or more, I think it is progress. It's a start, isn't it? And that's what for a long time we've all been calling for, a ceasefire, to start to reset the relationship, to start to get humanitarian aid into Gaza and reconstruction, to get the hostages home. I've since been elected as an MP, met with families of hostages in Parliament. It's incredibly moving to hear their stories, some of whom now, they know that their loved one is no longer alive, but their body is still being held hostage in Gaza. So for initially, I think around 33, I think it is initially, families will be reunited with their loved one or in some way, which is a positive. As Polly said on Sunday, hopefully the fighting will certainly cease. And I just hope that the international community doesn't see this as the job done. And I think, in Britain, we've been very clear. As Polly said, we see a two-state solution. We see a long-term peace-building process as necessary. And I think, like Alex, I visited Israel in September, actually, a month before October. And there is, I found, both in Israel and in Ramallah, in Palestine, immense desire from the general population for a workable peace. So although it doesn't feel with Hamas and the current Israeli administration, there's necessarily always much hope, I do find hope actually in the people of Palestine and the people of Israel.
As a constituency MP, and I'm presuming you've got a reasonably large Muslim population in your constituency, and indeed I know you've got a Jewish population too, how much pressure do you come under from sort of both sides of this conflict?
I mean, I try not to view it as sides of the conflict, really. I think most of my constituents have contacted me wanting peace, wanting hostages to be returned home. I think most people appreciate the complexity of the situation, and if only it was as simple as what Britain did or didn't say would bring about some resolution. We know that these international conflicts, the Israeli Palestinian situation has been decades and decades long. And so I think most of my constituents have appreciated the difference.
Well, according to one of my texters in the last hour, this is what you get under a Labour government. So I think he was actually sort of suggesting that somehow it was Keir Starmer that had enabled this to happen, which I found quite a stretch to, and I think possibly even you might find a stretch to that.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about President-elect Trump or Biden. I think with arrangements like this, we've seen before with the Northern Ireland peace process, it's multilateral efforts. It's efforts from a number of parties. It's buy-in from a number of partners internationally and domestically, actually, in the countries themselves that bring about these sorts of deals. So, all I would say from Keir Starmer's perspective is he's been, in the long term, been calling for a ceasefire. The Labour Party voted for a ceasefire under the last government and have been calling for, I think the right approach is hostages to be returned home, a ceasefire, we made a decision around stepping
But
up aid.
he didn't call for a ceasefire initially, did he? That was what led to a lot of the strife within the Labour Party.
Not immediately. I think I don't want to revisit now the arguments of old, but I think immediately in the aftermath, after that terrorist attack, with hostages being kept, obviously things were said around the need to bring those hostages home.
Right, let's take a follow-up question from Bradley in Southend, who says, surely this is already a sign that Trump means what he says and gets stuff done. You can release those horses now, Anne.
Thank you, horses are out. That is exactly the way the Trump administration will present this. Obviously, if you're at the end of the Biden administration, you'll say, well, this is the fruits of our labours on this to get to the ceasefire, but keep that balance on getting the hostages home. Although, actually, in fairness, standing out really to anybody involved, this has not really happened, has it? This was the aim of having a balanced policy has not worked out. In the end, Israel, the IDF, was asking for more time, as they saw it, to clear out Hamas and infrastructure, particularly in the tunnels in Gaza. The humanitarian consequences have been absolutely dire and have troubled a lot of people who would otherwise be simply absolutely and clearly on the side of Israel against Hamas. But one thing that has not happened, I'm afraid, is that we don't yet know what the shape of this deal is on the hostages, and that will be very, very difficult. I think for Donald Trump, who, of course, I think has markedly little to do with this, it's much more about where he wants to point his policy in the future and how does he leverage the relationship that he has been good, or his family and his previous administration built with Saudi Arabia, particularly in the hope that he could reshape something of the map in the Middle East. What we don't see in that, Toynbee mentioned it earlier, and it's a very fair point, we don't see any commitment really to getting two-state solution back on track. And at the moment, I think it's really off the table, but nobody has a better one.
Alex?
So I think that President Trump did put down actually a very helpful marker in saying, to Hamas, I want the hostages back by the time my inauguration happens. And I think that has probably helped.
Or else,
exactly. And I think that has helped the Biden administration and the Qataris get this deal over the line, actually. So You're
assuming that goes ahead as billed, Alex,
right,
because I may be being a bit too cautious here.
You're right, and maybe it doesn't. But based on what President Biden's sort of said this afternoon, we have to hope that that's the case. And I think in diplomatic negotiations, it's one of the things that's often most helpful is a hard deadline. And that's what
do it by now or else.
That's right. You come to we know we have to come to the table and talk because otherwise these things can run off into the ever after.
There's a reasonable chance as well that the fact of Trump taking over gives quite a shaking up to Netanyahu too. I mean, Trump wants his own victories, and if he's decided he wants peace, he won't tolerate an awful lot from Netanyahu, who really wants to hold on just because he wants to hold on to his position of power and he wants not to end up in jail.
And he knows that as soon as there is a permanent deal, he's out.
Exactly. So it may have taken the arrival of Trump to do that. And, if so, well, that will be one good thing.
Danny?
I think, as I said before, for me, it's not so much which individual leader or individual nation contributed most to this process. I think quite clearly the Biden administration's played a big part. I'm sure President-elect Trump and his team have been involved and briefed and having conversations. The Foreign Office here has been involved, as have the Qataris, the Egyptians, and other European and broader partners. So for me, I think it's a really important day. It's useful to kind of reflect about the difficulties of getting here. But now I think those international efforts cannot cease. I think the conversations need to continue, and we need to quite quickly both start reconstruction of Gaza and getting vital aid in, which has been prevented from reaching people in Gaza. And also start a longer-term process for discussion around a sustainable two-state solution.
OK, well, we can take more questions on this if you'd like to give us a call, 0345 6060 973, or WhatsApp us on that number, or text us on 84850. But there are plenty of other stories in the news today, so you can phone in on those as well if you like. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
You probably
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:17 on LBC. Conservative MP Alex Burghart is with us. Danny Beales, Labour MP, Polly Toynbee from The Guardian, and Anne McElvoy, who hosts the Power Play podcast. What's on your latest episode?
Well, actually, it fits very well with a topic that we've just been talking about. And I've been talking to Tom Fletcher. Some people will remember he was a kind of serial foreign policy advisor to Blair, to Brown, and to David Cameron. And now is the UN aid coordinator, humanitarian aid coordinator. For some reason, Britain always seems to sort of get person into that role for historic reasons. He's in Ukraine at the moment, but he's also involved in trying to raise an awful lot of money against a very difficult political backdrop around the world for aid, for humanitarian aid and emergency relief. And, he is admitting that this is not coming forward. These are not the times of the greatest global. Money is short in many countries, many democratic countries who want to uphold this sort of thing. And he made pretty clear, actually, that the situation in Gaza is terrible. We need to do more. Even when we can do more, how are we going to afford to do it, given that we're very much stretched in Ukraine and we're waiting really to see what approach Donald Trump takes. It's not like Donald Trump is really not supposed to go out and fundraise for the UN, but it does send signals, and it sends signals with a lot of donors. There's a real shortfall here. I'm not often, listeners might know, not much of a bleeding heart on many things. I'm quite, in terms of the international order, pretty tough.
You are robust.
Thank you. I'm going to take that. I am robust. Iain Dale.
Put it on the back of your next book.
Post it to X straight away. But on this one, and also having covered a lot of wars in my time, both in the former Yugoslavia, also on the Soviet periphery and beyond. It is something I think where I think the UN really it's great to have someone in there advocating for emergency relief, and that is whether it's Gaza, whether it's Ukraine, whatever your favourite cause is or isn't. Just something to keep in our minds.
Well, talking of robust people, we have Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition, on the programme tomorrow night between 7 and 8. She'll be taking your calls for the whole hour. I'm not going to do one of my normal sort of 15-minute interviews and then do phone calls. It's going to be all phone calls. Mm-hmm. So we're looking forward to that. If you want to submit a question, you can do so via the LBC website. If you go to lbc.co.uk/question, and that will come through to us, and we'll see if we can get as many. And do put your mobile number on it as well, and we'll get as many of you on as possible. Right, George is asking, if Donald Trump also ends the Ukrainian war within his first month as president, would he be a legitimate candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize? Alex.
So, will somebody tell me, Iain, you're a source of information. Who decides who gets the Nobel Peace Prize?
There's a committee of great and good Norwegians.
And who? It's all Norwegians.
Yes.
So it's not in a Chinese. There are these sort of very peaceful Scandinavians who sort of meditate on who's made a great contribution.
These are the same people that gave it to Barack Obama before he'd even become president.
And they are the same people who gave it to Henry Kissinger, for heaven's sake.
Are they immortal? Are they the same people sitting in the fjords, generation after generation? I think based on what's happened in the past, it's possible. But I think, as we've been discussing previously, if this comes off, it's the result of many hands. But as I said before, I do think that President-elect Trump has played his role already.
But what role do you think he could play in bringing about the end of the war in Ukraine?
Well, and I think there is, regardless of the desirability of this or the non-desirability, depending on where in the argument you are, I think that if the new president came in and said to Mr. Zelensky, that's it, I need you to take this deal, and had says to Mr. Putin, what you have today is yours, but the rest of Ukraine is now under my protection, that would probably bring an end to the war. And I'm not saying that I would...
Putin could regard that as a victory.
At huge cost.
Yeah, well, of course.
I really object to the word yours here. I think
No, sure. Look, please, don't think that I am thinking that's a good idea. I just conceive that might happen, and it would be one way in which peace would be brought about.
It would be a very temporary peace. It would not lead to peace in Europe in the long run.
I fear that whatever happens will be temporary in Ukraine as well. I think that the war is ongoing. But you asked the question, Ian, what might he do? I think that's what might happen. And if he does, it's probably something that the rest of Europe is going to have to live with, because Europe does not have the resources to continue the war on its own.
Well, it does, but it just won't.
Well, it would require it to step up its military spending very, very quickly. And it doesn't, you can't just suddenly turn on.
That is true.
Your supplies balance.
We were going to have to step up our military spending hugely more forever if we are constantly defending ourselves against Putin. We had a deal like that before of Ukraine. He broke it, and there's and he's broken these things over and over again. He will again. There is no security not only for Ukraine or Moldova or other countries there, but for all of us. And so we will be obliged to spend a fortune more. Much better to spend the money now and hope to get.
I think you're being very robust.
I'm glad.
So Alan is
the real tap Polly Toynbee on the Hawk team here.
I didn't expect to be finding myself agreeing with Polly on defence matters, but now it turns out that she's very robust. I can.
Not to say hawkish.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that our European neighbours and allies in NATO have been underspending on defence year after year after year after year, and if this isn't the moment when that changes, I fear the moment will never come.
Okay, Labour MP Danny Beales, are you equally robust and hawkish? That's what we all want to know.
Well, that judgment's out. But I mean, I would just say I think fundamentally it's the decision of the Ukrainian people, to initiate peace discussions and to participate in them or not. Obviously, they are still living with an illegal invasion of sovereign Ukrainian territory day to day. They are the ones on the front line. It isn't the UK. It isn't the US or any European partner. It's Ukrainian people fighting for their freedom. And yes, they have significant financial and military support. But I think, as Polly indicated, the UK has been a substantial contributor to that. Poland, other European countries have actually done quite a lot relatively. And there is capacity, I think, for Europe to support more. I think. What could Donald Trump do? He certainly could pick up a phone. He has before, and I'm sure he may again. And I would certainly, be happy for him to do so, to encourage President Putin to withdraw his troops, to withdraw from Ukrainian territory, and to return to the Ukrainian people what is theirs.
What about the idea of the Nobel Peace Prize? That's what our questioner wants to know.
Well, I mean, I think if you can get President Putin to withdraw from Ukraine and bring about a peace in Europe, we've seen welcome steps in the Middle East. Hopefully, yet more to come. I think that would deserve recognition for anyone involved in that process.
You mean for Trump, not Putin?
Well, I think a number of people have been involved in the situation in Gaza and Palestine. I'm sure similarly a number of people will be involved.
You're not. I mean, let me just get this clear.
I think this is nonsense. Can I just say
so?
As much as I enjoy it, this is not true.
And you can in a second. But just to get this clear, you're not suggesting President Putin should get a peace prize.
In no way. I mean, he's
That's kind of what I was inferring from what you said.
Donald Trump should get the prize.
Well, I mean, this is all hypothetical. I'm saying I welcome the possibility of peace, the withdrawal from Ukraine of Russia. I think anyone who was able to negotiate such a hypothetical arrangement would deserve recognition.
So therefore, those who were responsible for appeasement in the 1930s should get the Nobel Peace Prize, kind of thing.
No, I think...
Because that's what you're saying. Anybody who brought about peace on any terms seems to me a really risky framing. I'm using the Peace Prize as an example. I think you're slightly misconstruing my words. My words were if someone were to support, to engage President Putin, getting to withdraw from Ukraine and return this territory... All of it?
Yeah.
Well, that's not going to happen. So, but I mean,
we're talking about a purely hypothetical context, aren't we? In a sense, I mean, hypotheticals are hypotheticals.
To be a bit more serious about your idea. I mean, the reason I was worried about it, to be honest, Danny,
it wasn't my idea to give him the Nobel Peace Prize.
No, it was Ian's idea. No, it was the caller's idea.
Nothing to do with me, Gav.
It's George's idea.
Should we move on?
Yes.
I think we should, before we get any more confused. No name on this one. We talk about a two-state solution as the only solution to the Middle East conflict. Effectively, over the last 20 years, there's been a Palestinian self-governing state called Gaza, which has fallen into terror, autocracy and repeated rounds of conflict. How does a two-state solution solve these issues and lead to lasting peace? Anne?
Well, it's although it's provocatively put, it's a good question. Self-governance and very limited self-governance has clearly not been successful if it ended up with Hamas running Gaza and also in the West Bank. But I do think there's a suppressed premise here, right? Which is, what is the terms on which a Palestinian state could exist at all? I mean, you do have to have an idea of how it might be viable and what that would take on the Israeli side. And I do regret that under the Netanyahu government, that's just gone further and further out of focus. So if you say, why is this state not functional as it is, you also have to ask whether it is being allowed to be so. I think there is broadly support, certainly in the democratic world, for a two-state solution, because there isn't really another one that works. If you thought that within the one-state solution there would be a place that would be secure and durable for Palestinians and also for those who remember that this is a kind of quite mixed up part of the world. You often have territories and families and people with very different roots. There's still an argument about the difference between what it is to have an Arab background and to be a Palestinian, for instance, or a debate, I shouldn't say an argument. But, you've got to allow this to be theoretically thinkable, and then you can start to negotiate, as everybody did who was involved in the Oslo peace accords. As long as you don't acknowledge that, then there is no way out of this. I mean, if someone had one, I would love to hear what it is. I would also, by the way, be open to it. I'm not someone who's particularly wedded to a form of words. But I don't see a way that is different from this. It's simply that the road will be a lot longer and a lot harder, not least as a result of what happened on October the 7th.
Danny?
I mean, I think fundamentally, to the caller's point, there hasn't been elections in Gaza for a long time. I think some polling that I saw, albeit some time ago before the current conflict, suggested that the majority of Palestinians in Gaza did not actually support the Hamas administration. So I think it's unfair to suggest somehow that a Hamas-led authority is an inevitable outcome of any state or administration. I agree with what Anne said. It is complex. Two-state solution is not easy. Hence, largely why it hasn't happened. There's the issue of Jerusalem, there's the issue of settlements and land swaps. We've had abortive attempts at peace a number of times, but that doesn't mean because
each time scuppered by Yasser Arafat.
Yeah, I mean, just because it's hard does not mean we should. And I would say it's exactly because it's hard. It's exactly for all the things that have happened. It's even more reason that we must try, because clearly the situation now is not sustainable, and both the Palestinian people and the Israeli people are not going anywhere. And fundamentally, we have to find a sustainable peace. And for me and for many, that is a two-state solution.
Alex?
Look, I don't know what the solution is, and I often feel that the two-state solution is a sort of placeholder that we use because none of us really know how to resolve this. I think where we are now is hopefully a period of peace, a period of calm. Hopefully the hostages are going to be returned. Hopefully, Gaza will start to be rebuilt. Hamas, it must be said, must have been enormously degraded by what has just happened. And so we will have to see what sort of political reality emerges from Gaza before we can start to understand, what the future of that area is going to be and what it's going to ask for.
Polly?
Perhaps we as a country, a little bit, and in a small way, understand this better than some other places because of Northern Ireland. And we've seen how a long war over, not quite a war, but, appalling conflict over many decades, people get tired of it in the end. And although Gaza has fallen under the hands of Hamas, terror autocracy, no elections and all of that, maybe who would have thought we would see the sort of peace we saw with terrorists in Northern Ireland, and yet peace was done. Uncomfortable, awkward, rows all the time, but nevertheless not fighting. And so we know it can be done, and that people change, countries change.
Well, people always quote Northern Ireland. You could go back to Rwanda, which in fact was probably, in some ways, in terms of reconciliation, more significant. You can talk about the South Africa situation as well back in the 1990s. And there are all sorts of conflicts that have come to a resolution which people couldn't see a way through. So maybe we should be a little bit more optimistic. Right, we're going to move on to other subjects over the next half an hour of the programme. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. It's 8:32. News headlines with Daryl Jackson.
Joe Biden says it's hoped a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas will see a permanent end to the war. It's due to start on Sunday and last for 6 weeks initially. The outgoing US president says it's one of the toughest negotiations he's ever experienced. The Prime Minister has ruled out holding any kind of emergency budget after UK borrowing costs soared. The government's been given some relief with inflation falling unexpectedly last month. 2 teenagers and a woman have been arrested after a 14-year-old boy was stabbed to death on a bus in southeast London. Kellyanne Bacassa was killed in Woolwich last Tuesday. LBC weather, mainly dry tonight with patchy mist or fog and a frost in places, a low of 1 degree.
This is LBC.
Start.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:35. Alex Burghart is here, Conservative Shadow Cabinet Office Minister. Alex, you deputised for Kemi at PMQs before Christmas. How terrifying was that? Because you put in, should we say, quite a feisty performance, I remember.
Well, I had quite a lot of adrenaline in me. Kemi phoned me up on, I think it was the Monday, and said, Prime Minister's away this week. And I said, oh, right, and who should we get to do PMQs? She said, well, you're going to do it. Right, okay, thanks very much. And then I didn't sleep that well that night, but you sort of get into it, and then you think about it a great deal, and then you stand up and you just ask 6 questions, and it's over like that. And
easy.
Well, it goes so.
Sounds like Ian's job.
Were you aware of how shouty you were?
So, and you probably know this, Ian, that the microphone on the dispatch box is very good at not picking up the background noise in the chamber. And I had, however many million of Labour MPs there are now, just sort of shouting at me. And if the speaker...
Were you one of them, Danny?
I apologise.
It's all Danny. And if the speaker can't hear what's going on, he'll interrupt you. So you had to get the balance right, which I probably didn't, of being heard by the speaker and not sounding too loud on the microphone, because it breaks your flow if Lindsay stands up. So it was an exhilarating experience, but one I don't think I'll be doing again anytime soon.
Well, you never know. Polly
know.
Toynbee is here, columnist for The Guardian, and McElvoy, the robust broadcaster, and Danny Beales, Labour MP for Uxbridge and South Ruislip. Right, a text question here from Archie in Inverness. 2 years after his wrongful conviction for rape was formally quashed and having served 17 years in prison on account of that gross injustice, Andrew Malkinson has not received a penny piece in compensation and remains in straitened circumstances. Where is our shame? Well, today, Mr. Malkinson says he feels vindicated after Helen Pitcher resigned as the chair of the Criminal Cases Review Commission, claiming she's been made a scapegoat for its failings. A report last year thoroughly condemned how the Commission handled this case and how long it had taken to clear Mr. Malkinson, given the DNA evidence which proved his innocence had been available for years. After his release in summer 2023, he found himself living in a tent and using a food bank. Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but you are a lawyer, aren't you?
I'm not. No,
you're not a lawyer.
I'm not. You haven't even done the most basic research.
No, I haven't. I do apologise. Yeah. Well, answer the question anyway.
So I don't know about this case, but this sounds like dreadful miscarriage of justice, and how awful that Mr. Malkinson should find himself in this position.
And Helen Pitcher sort of bleating about she's been made a scapegoat. Well, she was head of the organisation that was responsible for this. I can't quite understand why she thinks she's going to get any public sympathy. Somebody has to take accountability, and the person at the top usually is the person who has to.
Yeah, well, quite so. I know I've been dealing with a less severe case with a constituent, and it really, when you first read these things, you think there must be another side to it, because this is so shocking. Of somebody who was accused of doing something wrong at work and ended up losing everything. Lost their job, ended up losing their house, lost their pension entitlements, and then it turned out that he hadn't done anything wrong at all. And the system at that point just says, sorry. And that really isn't good enough. We have to have a better understanding of the enormous damage that systemic failure can make to individuals' lives.
Polly?
Yep, it's incomprehensible, isn't it? Once it was exposed, you would have expected him to at least be given a lump sum at once, even if later on they had to work out whether it should be a bit more or whatever, as with the post office, postmasters, as with the blood scandal people. You'd think there could be a system where once it's established beyond doubt these people are innocent, you give them a bunch of money for the time being, and then it can take longer to finesse it.
But why is the system incapable of doing that?
Can't think, don't know. It's outrageous. Happened under the last government, still happening under this government. Can't think why.
Danny, everyone thought, well, new government, everything will be great, everything will change. It's proving to be a bit more difficult than that, isn't it? Not just in this case, but overall.
Predicted. I don't know about anyone else, but when I was knocking on doors, to be frank, most of my residents in Uxbridge and South Ruislip were quite realistic. There were, after 14 years and everything that has come to pass and the difficulty of the economy and public services, I think most people are quite realistic. They realised overnight you don't build a hospital, overnight you don't reform the criminal justice system or the immigration system. So I think most people appreciate, these are inherent, quite long-term, unreformed services that require investment and reform. What they want to see is progress, and I think that's the challenge for us. I personally think we are seeing some progress. On this case, I don't know the specifics, but it does sound a really terrible situation that needs further investigation. I think more broadly, it talks to the challenge of the criminal justice system, where actually, whether you're convicted fairly or not, when we all hope that people will be reformed by the prison process. It's not just about incarceration and removal from society. It should be about reintegration, and unfortunately, that is for most people not the case. People return often in situations of homelessness, unemployment, de-skilled. Often in prison. We have heard this week of challenges of access to drugs and other paraphernalia in prison. So quite clearly, the criminal justice system more broadly does need change and reform.
Anne?
Yeah, I do agree with that. This case always reminds me, along with the dreadful saga of the sub-postmasters, and how long even that is still taking to go through the system and to get the redress that is clearly there is something we should all check ourselves for a little bit. And also I would say this about the media, which is that sort of where there's smoke, there's no smoke without fire kind of feeling, which clearly this man, Mr. Malkinson, was very much a victim of that, as well as the dreadful callousness of the system. I think there's sometimes a case for people at the heads of institutions saying, look, it wasn't just me who failed. There's bigger things you need to look at here in order of things. We get it a lot, in social services as well. Do you just simply say, well, this person at the top must go, heads must roll, they're dragged through very unpleasant media
she's
coverage.
gone of her own volition.
Well, she has gone of her own volition, but I'm saying the same thing applies fundamentally, that it's often a failure that is not only the person, if you like, who is at the top. But in this case, I rather agree with the question that you put in, which is that someone clearly has to take responsibility. At least it's one small step towards getting justice for this man who has suffered terribly. And I actually did read the details of the case when it was revealed, because probably like a lot of people, I generally think that people are convicted of rape and would like to see the rape conviction rate go up for the guilty. I probably was a bit of a tin ear to the fact that it could sometimes go so terribly wrong. So you and I stand a bit corrected by this story.
Okay. Right, a text question from Kim, although I wonder whether she's meaning this for tomorrow night. Kemi's questioning at PMQs today was utterly scattergun. Nothing landed, and it's not the first time she's fumbled it. Is she up to the job, Alex Burghart?
Of course she's up to the job. And it was scattergun today because it was what we call a target-rich environment. Plenty of things which she wanted to knock the Prime Minister over the head for. And actually, genuinely, leaving the chamber, there were lots of MPs saying, that was really good. It was her best performance yet. So
till next week.
Absolutely. So no, I think she did really well, and the fact that she had a lot of subjects to go on is more a reflection of the state the government's in than anything else.
Does it work though? This approach that she seems to have adopted, where she doesn't get shouty. She's very deliberate in what she's saying. She doesn't get emotional.
You'd like that. You didn't like it when I was shouty. Yeah.
I didn't say I didn't like it. I just said you were shouty, which I think was a fact. I did. I think I tweeted that I thought it was a quite very good performance.
Kind. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I mean, when she was elected leader, I did think that it was going to be box office watching her have a go at Keir Starmer every week.
Would you like her to be a bit sort of...
It doesn't matter what I would like.
No, but I'm curious.
But she has developed a reputation for not being particularly brilliant at PMQs. Now, I think that she's been a lot better than a lot of people have written that she is. But it's obviously a deliberate strategy to just remain calm at all times.
I think that she has... I think she's adopted a tone that works well for her and well in the chamber. I think the tone that she had last week when she was talking about the rape gangs was absolutely perfect. A very difficult subject. Managed to hold the chamber really in the palm of her hand. So I think hers is an appropriate style, and I think it's starting to work.
But there wasn't a single question today that Keir Starmer had difficulty in answering.
Well, I think there's another way of putting that, Ian, which there's not a single question that he answered. And if you're happy with that, you can, he can do no wrong.
Now, Danny, take off your Labour Party hat for a second and put your political commentator. I know you don't have a political commentator hat, but just let's pretend you do. What's your genuine assessment of her performance at PMQs?
I mean, it's hard for me to do so, but I think pretty dire, to be fair. I mean,
all right, take the hat off then.
I mean, from my perspective, she faces a fundamental challenge in that she's still shackled to the record of the past, which is so discredited, hence the election result, which, as you said, however many millions of Labour MP, I think over 400 of us in constituencies like mine where we've never had a Labour MP before, people were so fed up with the last 14 years, of which, unfortunately, Alex and Kemi were inextricably linked. I don't think there's been any reflection about that. There's no real reflection about that at PMQs or actually anywhere in the House of Commons at any point. There's no mea culpa moment, no moving on. And I do really think that, it's not for me, maybe it's a political commentator. If I had to give advice to the Conservative Party, which I don't really want to do, it would be to do that. It would be to generally reflect, to have heard what the voters have told you. And I don't think in Kemi's questioning there's been any recollection.
Well,
of
she's
that.
making a big speech tomorrow where I think she is addressing exactly that issue, so it'll be interesting
Maybe
to see.
she's heard what I just said.
She's going to do it now as a result of what Danny just said. Yeah, I'm not sure, Pierre. Well, I'm very sure that Prime Minister's Questions is not the place where you do your self-reflection and look at the flaws in your past record. That's not what it's for. It is to hold the Prime Minister to account and also to score some wins for your party. I quite like the robustness of Prime Minister's Questions. My feeling is that Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer, weirdly, although they're very different characters, have a similar weakness, that they often talk in a strangely sort of floaty language. They don't sort of nail their points to something that you can, sort of for Keir Starmer, it's always, we're on the road to somewhere and we're not the Conservatives, and give us time and you can't expect us and it's only 6 months, etc. And therefore he tends to sort of go around quite difficult things like that. But I think that does actually, it is over time, I think that wears. I think would be surprised if Danny's constituents and others in Labour, very marginal seats, aren't worried about it. In Kemi's case, she sort of did it a bit today when she went along the lines of, well, I know a businessman whose business is going to close because of things that are difficult. And it was a bit like who, what, where, why, what is it you're really targeting here? I think, Alex, if you're able to advise her as a close associate, she's very unspecific about what is the thing that she's really objecting to most in order to, I think, for if you like, for the dart to have more of an arrow. I think that would be a reasonable critique of her performance.
Polly.
Well, I'm disappointed because I think she's clever. I think she's interesting. I think she's quite a strong character. So I thought she was going to shine. I thought that she would seem much livelier than Keir Starmer, perhaps. And it hasn't really worked out that way. He seems serious, prime ministerial, and deals with her without being offensive or rude pretty easily. She's going to have to get an awful lot better than that if she wants to make a mark, I think. It's interesting in terms of, she has had this problem that everything she raises, of course, says, well, that's what Labour inherited. And to say, well, after 6 months, that's sort of not. There's a YouGov poll today. People were asked who's most to blame. Overwhelmingly the Tories. And
let's see how long.
Still the case.
Let's see how long. I cannot predict, but there will be a time which is everyone just suddenly get fed up.
Well, all right, but nevertheless,
you need a direction of travel from
people
Labour.
are quite sensible. I mean, it was interesting. People know it takes a long time to get things fixed. They don't expect things done. Perhaps it wasn't you. Perhaps it was Danny. Done overnight. And I think most people are quite reasonable about that. They know perfectly well
when they realise that the plans aren't good enough and the ideas are not bold enough, that's when the problem will start.
Well, when you look at the state of the NHS, and they know how it was in 2010, and they know how it was when Labour got it back again, and the world is different.
We'll take some more questions in just a moment. It's 8:49.
This is LBC.
It's
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:52. I was just commenting that there's lots of people seem to want me to leave the programme, and then Anne points out a text on the screen that says, "Panel, do you like me wonder why Iain Dale has never chaired Have I Got News for You? He has it all: erudition, a grasp of current affairs, and the unerring ability to laugh at his own jokes."
Was that from Iain Dale?
I'm not laughing. I'm not laughing at that. Right, Shuvik is in Orpington. Hello, Shuvik.
Hello, Ian. Yes, I'd like to ask the panel, should the UK study and bring in a version of Spain's law on empty properties held by non-EU residents? Because in relation to stamp duty and capital gains tax in the UK and property taxes.
Well, I think the Spanish government are proposing 100% tax on foreigners, non-EU foreigners, who buy properties in Spain. So I guess the question is, should the government bring that in here, maybe for second homes or maybe for foreigners who buy... there are I don't know if anybody knows the detail of this, but didn't George Osborne bring in a measure for foreigners who buy properties and then leave them empty? There was some sort of surcharge or sort of extra stamp duty.
Councils already can charge extra council tax for long-term empty properties, and many councils...
How do you know whether... How do councils know whether a property is empty? How do you judge it?
I think it's
through the windows.
It's similar to the council tax system. If you're a single occupant of a council of a property, you get a council tax reduction. So it's a similar trust-based system, I think, of reporting. There might be some proactive inspections.
Yeah.
But I mean, that would kill the market, wouldn't it? If you imposed 100% levy on a sort of £500,000 house, nobody's going to buy one, are they?
If you look at the state of London property, there are large swathes of the posh bits of London that really are empty, bought up by foreigners, and mothballed. I've talked to Knightsbridge estate agents who are shocked by it and beg them to at least let the properties out. But they are completely closed up, mothballed. It's like buying a Picasso and putting it in the bank. It's just an investment. There is a whole tower on the South Bank, round tower, rather splendid, almost entirely bought by foreigners, almost entirely empty. There's lots of Kensington and Chelsea, and I think if you did do that, it might stop foreigners doing that, and I think it would be a very good idea. I think it would bring down prices. Good thing.
Danny.
As I said, I think councils do already have some ability to charge extra council tax for long-term empty properties. I think from my perspective, in a constituency like mine in outer London, the predominant issue, there is a housing crisis, the predominant issue is simply there aren't enough homes. There hasn't been many homes built for a long time. There's been increasing demand movement out of the centre of the city to outer London. The rental market isn't working, and I think that's why this week I was really pleased that we were able to move forward the Renters' Rights Bill that will, end Section 21 eviction and do so much good in the rental market, in ending, no-fault evictions and more. So I think for me, of course, there might be more that can be done around those extra charges, but the fundamental broken nature of our housing system is we need to build 1.5 million more homes. We need to build more council homes. We need to fundamentally reform the rental system that exists for the majority of people.
Anne?
I'm more aligned with what Danny's just said. I think there's often, and I understand why it exists, Ian, but I think there's a bit of a confusion about the idea that if you really, really tax heavily or have very punitive moves on very rich people who are buying for investment, that those properties, either by their suitability, by their basic price point, even if it was brought down, are going to be the answer. Well, I don't. Yeah, I very much would like to see properties not empty. So I'm interested in how Danny's ideas really work out in practice there. But if you're buying as an investment, I would say 100% sounds unrealistic to me because in a sense there is also an international and competitive market, and you don't want to drive everyone away who might want to buy property perfectly reasonable in the country. I'm also kind of interested when people come with that kind of punitive idea, and it's a very socialist idea in Spain. I don't think, by the way, it will work because I think it will bring Spanish construction and property crashing down as well. So these things do have consequences that are not. We're not just you don't just make a diagram and then markets and people and property behave in that way. But a lot of people who want us to stay open to going abroad, to living abroad, landlords some of the time to moving to and fro, and then, but don't let foreigners actually have any property. That seems to me to be, that's a mismatch, and it never really works out in practice unless you want to go for a form of isolationism, and whether it's from the left or the right, I don't really like it.
Alex?
I don't know. I'd be interested to see how it plays out in Spain. And I think the thing that I'm most interested in for young people in my constituency and some not so young people in my constituency is how we can come up with, as a country, come up with a suite of policies which mean that over time we increase the proportion of UK citizens who own their own homes. And that's what we haven't seen for a very long time. That governments, my past government did it, this government's doing it, talk about building lots of homes, and that's a part of it. But if you build a lot of homes and a lot of them are bought by people who already have homes, then you don't increase the proportion of UK citizens who own their own homes. And I think that's what we all want, right? We want the property-owning democracy. So I think it does need some fresh thinking.
Right, let's move on to our fun question from Eliza in Birmingham. The actor David Schwimmer, a.k.a. Ross from Friends, has revealed that during a summer job at a law firm when he was a teenager, he served divorce papers on Rod Stewart. What's your strangest encounter with a famous person? You can't include yourself. Polly?
Boris Johnson, stark naked, very fat, very pink, with his shock of golden hair, lying on the ground on a bath mat and kicking his legs in the air. He was 6 months at the time.
You're so disappointed.
I thought you'd given us the newsline of the night there.
That's very funny.
Alex?
The Dalai Lama. I was a young parliamentary researcher in 2008, and I was sent to pick up the Dalai Lama from David Cameron's office. The Dalai Lama skipped out, leaving behind him David Cameron, William Hague and George Osborne, who were all wearing garlands of flowers. And he then skipped down the corridor with me in tow, talking to me about how wonderful his day had been. And then we bumped into Charles Clarke, and Charles Clarke said, hello, Your Holiness. I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Charles Clarke. I'm a former Home Secretary. And Dalai Lama said, yes. He said, last time you saw me, you patted me on my tummy and said, very fat, Mr. Clarke. And the Dalai Lama said, yes, not so fat now, Mr. Clarke, suggesting that maybe His Holiness had sort of created some kind of fat-reducing Ozempic-style miracle to slim Charles down.
Beat that.
I can't. I felt, I'm definitely just going to add. I was on holiday somewhere, it sounds very luxurious, but very occasionally in the Caribbean, playing tennis, and I had terrible cruciate ligament. I just went. The world turned around me. I collapsed on the tennis court. My knee was in dreadful state, and it was agreed that, I think it was, God bless them, British Airways would fly me back, and I could only lie flat, so I was in first class, first time in my life. And behind me, in mere business class, was Paul Weller of the Jam. And I sort of looked at this kind of wan creature, and I'm a great Jam fan, and I've also made programmes about the Jam and their influence on British politics. Just like, who is this crazy woman lying on a stretcher, sort of groaning in pain, being taken into the first class cabin? But it was really only to get me away from everyone else.
Well, if you're listening, Paul, we'd love to hear from you about that. Danny?
Oh, what act to follow? I don't think anyone could beat Polly's very vivid imagery about Boris Johnson being naked, kicking his feet in the air. I think for me, not particularly weird encounter, but what stuck with me in 2008 in Parliament, I accidentally bumped into Joanna Lumley at that time in Parliament, and kind of absolutely in awe as a young researcher at that time in Parliament. Really? She was kind of towering over me, looking amazing, like in ab fab or something. She was campaigning at that time on the Gurkhas. This amazing campaign she was doing, and she turned around and called me darling, and I immediately kind of melted immediately, and I lost all ability of speech. And I think that will stay with me for quite a long time.
Well, David says my nomination would be Iain Dale in a dark theatre car park. Unfortunately, David, I have no recollection of this encounter, but there we are. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us tonight. On Monday, we have on the panel, and it's the day of Donald Trump's second inauguration, we'll be joined by the Republicans Overseas UK spokesperson Jennifer Ewing, the American broadcaster and journalist Tom Rivers, and Britain's Minister for the Americas during most of Trump's first term, Sir Alan Duncan. So they'll all be with me on Monday. And don't forget, tomorrow at 8 o'clock, Kemi Badenoch will be with me in the studio taking your calls. What did I just say? It's at 7, not 8. Silly boy. Right, it's at 7 o'clock tomorrow, Kemi Badenoch. You don't want to miss it, do you? But you can always catch up on Global Player. Now, Sir Keir Starmer's deal to cede sovereignty of the Chagos Islands has been thrown into doubt as he admitted an agreement could not be reached before the inauguration of Donald Trump. British negotiators have been scrambling to get a deal over the line before Trump enters the White House on Monday. They've offered to front-load a payment of £9 billion spread over 99 years to lease back Diego Garcia, the largest island of the archipelago, which is home to a strategic US naval base. Should the government just abandon this Chagos deal now? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Joe Biden says it's hoped a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas will see a permanent end to the war. It's due to start on Sunday and last for 6 weeks initially. The outgoing US president outlined details of the first phase of the agreement.
It includes a full and complete ceasefire and the release of a number of hostages held by Hamas. And the Vice President and I cannot wait to welcome them home. In exchange, Israel released hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, and the surge of humanitarian assistance into Gaza will begin.
Well, here, Sir Keir Starmer says the Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal is the news Palestinian people have been waiting for. LBC's political correspondent